We're here to talk about the 5 stars that helped propel Ohio State on this national championship run. And I got On3 national analyst Steve Wiltfong here with me. We're going to review how Ohio State got here with the 5-star recruits. But before we get going, Ohio State fans, do me a favor. This is an exciting time. Jump on board and hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel. All right, let's bring in my guy, Steve Wiltfong. Steve, we're taking a look at some of these 5-star prospects that have, helped propel Ohio State to where they are. So let's go in reverse order. We'll start with the 2024 cycle, and it's Jeremiah Smith, the number 1 wide receiver, number 1 overall. Steve, sometimes it feels like when we hype somebody the way we did Jeremiah and speak so highly of him, he can only go he can only go down. But Jeremiah Smith blew away expectations in 2024. What do you remember about his recruitment? What do you remember about Jeremiah Smith?
Well, he was obviously the most sure thing to pan out in the 2024 recruiting class on the field. And before we jump in on JJ, when you look at Ohio State's roster, Josh, and you look at average ranking per commit or transfer portal signee, you're not going to find like a better average than Ohio State. They are absolutely loaded. And Jeremiah Smith, maybe the best player on the team already. And he's a guy that would be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft this April if he was allowed to come out. He is that talented. And I talked with an Ohio State coach back in the spring that coached against Randy Moss in college, and that was the comparison. Mm-hmm. And you see all kinds of people in this industry. He's a unicorn. He's one-on-one, and it's used every cycle about a guy, or they get compared to like the greats that have played. And for Jeremiah Smith to be compared to Randy Moss in the spring, it fits, man. He is absolutely a dominant player, and he handles himself like a pro in the locker room with his teammates, practice and games. And his recruitment, he committed to Ohio State very early without an announcement date. It was the program he always wanted to play at. He sees Brian Hartline as the guy that can get the best out of him mentally because he is uber talented. I mean, my wife could coach Jeremiah Smith.
Right.
So Brian Hartline, what he brings as a coach, the nuances of the position, getting a guy to prepare mentally for games, to understand what you're doing schematically, to even elevate him even more. That's what he wanted. He committed early to Brian Hartline in Ohio State. When you go through your process, there is a lot of ways to build your equity, and keeping other schools warm does that. And so he kept schools warm, and I do think at the end he did think strongly about potentially staying home and playing at Miami. Yeah. But that one maybe even was more so people around him. I think he wants to be a Buckeye, coached by Coach Hartline, play on this stage. This is everything he signed up for. He's going to be one of the highest paid players in college football next year, and rightfully so. And they held on. I mean, a lot of schools invested a lot of time and energy and resources to get this kid to visit multiple times, and it was to no avail. And Miami might have moved the needle the most, but I don't know if that's the way to spend your capital.
Yeah, obviously, looking back on it, it wasn't. But we've had Hayes Fawcett on here to do the callback to his recruitment, and Hayes, about 8 hours before signing day, was there crafting a Miami graphic just in case, because Jeremiah Smith hit him up and said, hey, get it ready. But in the end,
I do think that's true. But my best Jeremiah Smith source said it was all Ohio State. And yes, with that, Miami kept going back. So they never turned off the phone lines, but Ohio State was doing everything they needed to do with each step of that one. And these are wars, man. And you're talking about a player like Jeremiah Smith, rightfully so. I mean, the dude as a senior had 19 touchdowns. If you look over his last two seasons, which were state championships, he played in 28 games and scored 39 times. I mean, he's just a touchdown waiting to happen. He's a terrific route runner, great speed, ball skills off the charts. And he's physically as impressive a wideout as you're going to find.
Yeah.
And then just the way he carries himself. He's a grown man on the field and off the field. Some of these kids, we cover them, and they're kids. Jeremiah Smith never was a kid when I talked to him. He was always a pro. If he did an interview with you, there was no bullshit.
Yeah.
He answered your questions. There were no lies, no nothing. He was just a pro. He answered your questions. He didn't volunteer anything extra, but if you asked him a direct question, he gave you a direct answer. He just knows how to carry himself, and he's helped carry Ohio State to this title game against Notre Dame.
Yeah, he was a generational recruit and handled himself as such, and that has transitioned to the college level as well. Let's move on to the 2022 cycle. There was a couple 5-stars in this one. We'll start with athlete Sonny Styles. He was the number 2 ranked athlete in America, number 4 overall prospect, and he's lived up to the hype. Now, he was ranked as an athlete coming out of high school. Were you convinced at which position he would land? I mean, teams were kind of recruiting him all over the place, right?
Well, he was a guy, would he grow into a backer? Would he stay at safety? Because his athleticism was off the charts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, look, he reclassified and got into college early. And so I think that with another year in the hopper, who knows what that would have done for his development. But obviously, he's one of Ohio State's best players. He's a starter. He is a freak athlete with unbelievable length and plus agility, plus speed for the position. Comes from NFL pedigree. His dad, Lorenzo Styles Sr., played at Ohio State, Super Bowl champ, had a nice career in the NFL. I believe he was a second-round pick. His whole family's Buckeyes. His mom went to Ohio State. So his recruitment came down to Ohio State and Notre Dame, if I remember correctly. His brother actually kind of surprisingly picked Notre Dame out of high school, but has since transferred to Ohio State. Lorenzo Styles, a wideout that he transferred to the home team, the school that they all grew up rooting for. Mm-hmm. But Styles, man, I mean, he's just one of those guys that when you're playing on Saturdays or Monday night, he is as athletic as anybody on the field. He is not going to get out-talented by anybody. And to me, he has lived up to his billing and his ranking because he's a key guy for Ohio State in their run here.
Yeah, I agree. I think a 5-star prospect like a Sonny Styles is somebody that you have to account for anytime he's on the field. He makes an impact. Even if he's not making a play, he's impacting the offensive scheme. So he has absolutely been a big hit for Ohio State. Now, there's 2 more 5-stars in this class. Linebacker C.J. Hicks was ranked as the number 2 linebacker, number 14 overall. Probably hasn't met expectations yet. He is a contributor. He is on that 2 deep for Ohio State, but number 2 linebacker overall in the 2022 class. Now, also on this list is quarterback Devin Brown. And Steve, you can only play one quarterback at a time, so Devin Brown is in the transfer portal, but do you think there's still a little meat left on the bone of his career?
Well, I think he'll be highly coveted in the portal if that's the direction he chooses to go following the season. I think he'll have great value and someone that a program will believe in. We haven't seen much of him, but what we do know about him is that all the intangibles are there. I mean, this is a guy that's passionate about his team, passionate about his teammates. Anytime adversity was in his face, he shows up every day. He lifts his teammates up, lifts his program up. And he is present where his feet are on the ground, and that is at Ohio State. And it's unfortunate that he got hurt in the Mizzou game. I know he did not start out that game well, but he got all the reps in practice for the first time. Mm-hmm. Kyle McCord bounced and went to Syracuse. So they invested everything into him going into that game, and maybe he would have found his footing as the game continued and made some plays against Missouri. And some of his teammates, some of his key teammates didn't play in that game as they focused on the NFL draft. So he, went into that ball game against a Missouri team where it was literally their Super Bowl, and they played great, and he got hurt and he didn't get a chance to settle into that ball game. And then, with that, Ohio State went into the portal, got a veteran in Will Howard. Devin Brown is still a guy that's got some ability. And again, I think he'll command a market when the portal opens back up for him in Ohio State, if that's the direction he chooses to go.
All right, moving on to the class of 2021. Quinn Ewers, he was the headliner of this one. He moved on.
Everything, right?
What's that?
He played a series for the Buckeyes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And he moved on, and I think everything's worked out for both sides in this one. No complaints from Ewers or Ohio State. Just is what it is. Let's start with edge Jack Sawyer. What do you remember about his recruitment and how he ended up being a Buckeye?
Well, he got hurt his senior year, but he was as violent a football player as there was on film his junior year. Had 14 sacks, another 20 tackles for loss. He's a guy that played varsity basketball, just a fluid, explosive player. You saw the twitch, again, the violence that he played with. And that is certainly translated to Ohio State. He's a high motor guy that just lives to go after the quarterback. He's got that relentless ingredient. Some guys, when they get blocked, they quit. His motor's on till the play's over. Win some, you lose some.
Right.
But Jack Sawyer is an absolute animal. He's a leader. He's got a lot of Ohio pride, and he's one of the biggest reasons why Ohio State's playing in this game. He was a top 10 recruit, and it was because of that dual sport athleticism, that twitch, and violence that he plays the game with. And certainly he is one of the key guys for Notre Dame to be aware of going into Monday night.
All right, a couple more 5 stars. Defensive lineman JT Tuimoloau. He was the number 2 ranked defensive lineman, number 5 overall, and he's had a good career so far at Ohio State. How about his recruitment?
Yeah, so he actually signed late to get a feel for all of his favorites, watch him practice, if I remember correctly, in the spring, get a chance to see where he fit in best. But he always loved Larry Johnson. And he was also high on Alabama, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. But Larry Johnson playing for LJ, seeing what he did with the other 5 stars and top-ranked players, the Bosas, Chase Young, just making sure that he was best prepared to meet his potential as the number 1 recruit in the country. He ended up finishing number 2 because of the Quinn Ewers reclassification at 24/7 Sports, where I was at beforehand. But look, he is similar to Jack Sawyer, a really good athlete for a defensive lineman. I mean, you will turn on basketball. He played guard, forward and center, guarded everybody, rebounded, handled the ball, scored. He's just such a fluid guy, a twitchy, explosive player, and he's tough. Mm-hmm. And he's Ohio State's leader in sacks and tackles for loss, and it's because he's very tradesy, and he's had some really dominant, memorable games as a Buckeye. But he signed in April. He was the last one to lock in with Ohio State in 2021, adding to a class that's now got a chance to play for all the marbles.
Man, this team really came together with this 2021 class, and it's this run of number 1s at their position. Donovan Jackson, Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson. Mm-hmm. They were all the number 1 players at their position, Steve.
Yeah, Donovan Jackson, he was a guy that if you just judged him on height, 6'3", you would be you just wouldn't say, hey, he's a 5-star, mm-hmm. but he's got 5-star length, 5-star hand size, 5-star feet, and with that position flexibility. And he's a high IQ kid that strongly considered places like Stanford. But he played every position on the offensive line on the high school level. He was a varsity guy from day one at the same school that produced guys like Jaden Waddle, helped them win a state championship, if I remember correctly. But just the way he moved and how fluid of an offensive lineman he was, how twitchy. I remember talking to some people around Ohio State when he signed. They were just so excited to get him in there because of the traits of length and movement and his ability to bend, just how athletic he is. I mean, he is a plus athlete on the offensive line. And again, tough, a hard-nosed kid that is super smart and can help you get in the right protection pre-snap and go from there.
Yeah, and he'll be heading to the NFL draft this year. And, Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, all number 1s at their position as well. Also in this class was quarterback Kyle McCord, and comes back to what we said earlier. Only one guy can play quarterback. Doesn't mean Kyle McCord can't play. He just went to Syracuse to finish up his career, and I think it was a good move for him.
Well, that Michigan game kind of rocked a lot of things. And, when you lose to Michigan, it sets a tone around the building, and it was one where Kyle McCord was ready to move on for whatever reason. Coach Day was able to go get his guy Howard from Kansas State, and they're playing for all the marbles. And I know there were some times where some snarky comments were made during the season, but Ohio State is one of the last 2 standing now and playing for the national championship. And certainly Kyle McCord will be one of the first quarterbacks drafted. And anytime there was a second-year starter in Ohio State's offense under Ryan Day, they put up monster numbers. So that was something he chose to pass on.
Yeah.
After the Michigan game. But Ohio State was able to get better as the season went on here in the playoff, find themselves, and they're the favorite going into the Notre Dame game. Emeka Egbuka, he was as polished a route runner as there was in his class. He played on both sides of the ball. He had 25 touchdowns as a senior, receiving on 83 receptions. He also had 8 interceptions, dude. 2 he ran back for a touchdown. He returned 3 punts for scores, had 4 rushing touchdowns. Any way he touched the ball, he was lighting the scoreboard up. And again, just terrific hands, fantastic baseball player. And wasn't able to get his senior year because of COVID, but just a smooth operator that Ohio State was just deemed the favorite for much of his process. And then Travion Henderson was one of my favorite kids in that class. He could have been a top 100 safety recruit. In fact, that's what Clemson prioritized him at. Elite speed, like a 4.3 guy. He scored 4 touchdowns in his last high school football game, the state championship. He did not play his senior season because of COVID as well. But he is one of the most electric players in college football. He's a guy that if there's a seam or a crease, he can go the distance. He's always been that way, and it's because he's typically the fastest player on the field. I think he's going to be a really good pro. I think he's a guy that these NFL teams, they're going to be able to really scheme some exciting plays up for Travion Henderson, and I think he's carried himself like a pro at Ohio State, sharing the load. When his number's called in the offense, making the most of it, being a really good teammate, loving the Buckeyes. But his position versatility, he was he could have been a high-end safety recruit, and that's where some people prioritize him. And I remember predicting him to Ohio State, and he wasn't a known recruit then. He was in the back end of the top 100. And Ohio State was in the mix for a lot of top running backs. But I remember talking to some people around that recruitment in the shoe, and they're like, this is the best one. This is the guy we want the most. And he visited Georgia. Bulldogs were heavy on him. Michigan, I think, was a front runner. But Tony Alford helped Ohio State land Travion Henderson. Yeah. And I think he has certainly lived up to his ranking. And I think that he's someone that we could see score on a couple big plays on Monday night and help Ohio State win their first national championship since 2014. And Josh, let's end it with this. Recruiting, rankings, it's just a preview of how talented we think your team's going to be. And oftentimes, I think if you have the most talented team, you win your games holistically if you stack up roster talent. But I want to judge recruiting classes based on what they did on the way out. And so I would always be a little weird when people would be like, oh, Florida 2010, best recruiting class ever, or Texas A&M, best recruiting class ever. They wrote their stories and they weren't. The 2014 Ohio State class is probably the best recruiting class that I've ever covered. When you look at all those first rounders and what those guys went on to do in the NFL, they won a championship at Ohio State. That is how you're judged, in my opinion. Yeah. What you win and where you get drafted. And so this Ohio State class with the Mecca and Travion Henderson and those guys, they got a chance to really cement their legacy. But that 2014 Ohio State class with Joey Bosa and Deron Lee, 3-star to the first round, Ezekiel Elliott should have been a 5-star. Just the guys that they had in that class, that ended up being, in my opinion, the best recruiting class that I've covered.
All right.
Well, then there was that Bama class, right? Now I'm going off the rails, but there's
been some good ones. I mean, there's definitely been some good ones. But in Ohio State lore, the 2014, the 2021, those classes, numbers don't lie. These guys are not only great contributors on the field, they're great athletes off of it as well. And they've gone on to be great pros as well. And I'm sure a lot of these guys will go on to be great pros in the NFL as well. So Ohio State fans, talk to us as we sit here on about the eve of the national championship. How are we feeling right now? And how do you feel about some of these players in the class? Let us know who your favorite is. Comment section below. Also, drop the final score of the game on Monday night. Give us a hint of what you're thinking.